This video is brought to you by sellcashier.com. Sellcashier compares iPhone prices online and then gives you a quick quote and the most cash for your iPhone. Check out the link in the description below for more information. Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're doing a direct head-to-head comparison between probably one of the most popular and most anticipated comparison of the year. I'm talking about the Apple iPhone 6 versus the Samsung Galaxy S6. Now we have the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge, which is a virtually identical internally compared to the standard S6, but of course it has that curved display, which definitely looks cool. But if you're interested in seeing how the S6 compares against the iPhone, all things considered, perhaps you're looking for a new smartphone and you're debating whether to go iPhone or Galaxy S6. So if you're interested in that, let's get right into my full comparison. Now, physically speaking, you see that there's been some controversy between the new Samsung Galaxy S6 design and the iPhone 6. Now, we have the Edge model, so there's a little bit of difference in terms of that look, but you can't really deny it. There is quite a bit of similarities when it comes to the overall design philosophy that Samsung is going with. It's a very Apple-centric and certainly a very similar looking back that's pretty much uncanny, especially when you take a look at the standard S6 model. That being said, of course, we finally have a Samsung phone that can really compete against the iPhone. It's sad that they've kind of copied the design, but nonetheless, it is a very well built phone. It's using very high quality build materials, Gorilla Glass 4 on the back and front of the phone, and you have a full aluminum chassis all around the device that definitely gives it a leg up in terms of fit and finish and build quality that matches on what the iPhone 6 can deliver. Now, that being said, I'm not a fan of glass being on the back of smartphones because, one, you still have that potential of it shattering, even though it's Gorilla Glass 4, which is fairly durable and resistant to those kind of things, but it is still a fingerprint magnet, and I still would prefer to go all aluminum if I had the choice of designing the phone. Now, you can see at the back, both smartphones have protruding cameras, and we definitely complained about that on the iPhone, but you take a look at that outer lens element on the Samsung camera, it really sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's really kind of a shame. Although I understand technically it's probably difficult to fit all those different lens elements and to fit the optical stabilization system and then have a phone about 7 millimeters thin with all the different components on top. So engineering wise, it might have been a challenge, but it certainly would have been nice to see a flush mounted camera lens, and eventually I'm sure we'll get there. Now, physically speaking, you can see that the iPhone is certainly the smaller phone in terms of the overall footprint because it does have the smaller screen size, but in terms of the profile, they're fairly similar. We're looking at 7 millimeters and about 6.9 millimeters on the iPhone. So they're virtually identical in terms of the thickness, and in terms of weight, they're quite similar as well. About 132 grams on the S6 Edge and about 129 grams on the iPhone. Now, in terms of the displays, they're using very similar display technology, and indeed they have a different screen size and resolution. We're looking at about 5.1 inches with a native resolution of 2560 by 1440 on the S6 Edge versus about 1334 by 750 on the iPhone. In terms of PPI, we're looking at about 326 versus the Samsung is in another planet at 577 PPI. Now, there is also different screen technology. Samsung is using their Super AMOLED capacitive touchscreen display versus we have an LED IPS display on the iPhone. Now, one of the things that Samsung has been really pushing this year with the OLED display is trying to bring out as many lumens as possible. And in terms of my independent scores, in terms of maximum brightness, we get about 563 nits on the Samsung display versus about 606 nits on the iPhone. So the iPhone is still a tiny bit brighter than the Samsung, so it's going to be a little bit better to use in outdoor, brightly lit conditions. Additionally, it has that front polarizing layer on top of the glass, so it's going to reduce some of the added glare and reflections that you'll get with bright conditions as well. But in terms of the everyday user experience, you're definitely going to see that the Samsung, in pretty much every regard, is the better display. It's larger, higher resolution, better overall color rendition, because one of the things they've done with the new OLED display is really make sure that the colors are very nicely balanced and not over exaggerated and oversaturated with tons of contrast. They're making a very representative and realistic looking image and going away from that old-fashioned surreal Samsung look that we've seen in previous generation Galaxy S phones. Now, that being said, the iPhone is still a fantastic fantastic viewing experience. Sure, it's a sub 1080p resolution, but in most cases it doesn't really matter, and some people might sacrifice that resolution to have that overall smaller form factor. Now, in terms of realistic clarity differences, since we have such a difference in terms of PPI count and resolution, I do find that text and photos does seem to be sharper on the display on the Samsung. The numbers don't lie. You're eventually going to see that difference, even though it might be slight. And when you're using the phone up close and trying to see fine text and things like that, you will notice that the display is completely invisible when it comes to pixels, where you can still see a little bit of pixelation on the iPhone when you come in really close. Now, moving on, let's actually take a listen to the external speakers on these two smartphones to see which one sounds the best. Now let's briefly go over the internal specifications on these two smartphones. Now, both are quite similar in terms of the design philosophy when it comes to the internal architecture. They're both using a custom-built chip that is specifically designed for the phone. So on the Samsung side, they're using a custom Exynos 7420 chip. It is an octa-core CPU that is comprised of 2 quad cores. And in terms of graphics, we have the MLI T760 chip, and we have 3 gigabytes of RAM. Now, in pretty much every way, that sounds a lot more superior than what we have on the Apple side with the Apple A8 processor. It's a dual-core chip with 1 gigabyte of RAM, and in terms of graphics, it's using the Power VR GX 6450 chip, which is a quad-core graphics configuration. Now, we have a dedicated speed test video on the channel right now. You can check out the description down below and find that video, and you'll get more in-depth analysis in terms of the specific speed differences between the two, both in terms of critical analysis and real-world tests. I'm just going to share some of my Geekbench 3 results over here. You can see that the Samsung really matches the Apple A8 in terms of its single-core capabilities, with just the A just being a tiny bit faster. I'm sure it won't be noticeable in real life though, but when you're taking a look at that multi-core score, the Samsung completely destroys what the iPhone can do in terms of that. Now, the Antutu benchmark also reflects this notion quite well, getting kind of groundbreaking records on the Samsung of over 60,000 points versus around the 40,000 point mark on the iPhone, which is certainly not bad and very usable for the iOS platform. Now let's move on and talk about some of the unique factors about both devices. Now, both smartphones are using a fingerprint scanner, and Samsung has improved from the swipe feature that they used to use in the old Samsung Galaxy S5 and indeed the Note 4. Now you have a touch to unlock feature, which works in the same fashion as we've seen in the Touch ID system on the iPhone, and the only flaw is the actual home button that the sensor is on is not as large as the home button on the iPhone, so you have less surface area for your fingers and for your thumb and things like that, so you get more errors in misreads, but it's pretty fast to respond. Now, the S6 still has that heart rate monitor located at the back of the device, which is handy for any of you guys out there that use that feature. And in terms of the software upgrades, we're using the latest generation Android Lollipop on the S6, and they've really toned down some of the user elements on there. It doesn't have any excess applications that you'll probably never use or any bloated software features, which is definitely great to see. Additionally, it's going to be a warm welcome to anybody trying to enter into the Android space via a Samsung phone, and I'm sure Samsung is trying to target some of the Apple users to kind of get them over to the dark side. Now, moving forward, in terms of the camera differences between the two, we actually have a dedicated camera video on the channel right now and indeed in the description, so definitely check out that for in-depth camera analysis. But in terms of the specifications, there's a pretty big difference. In terms of the front-facing side, we have a 5 megapixel stills capabilities and 1080p video capturing capabilities on the Samsung, and only a 1.2 megapixel stills and 720p video on the iPhone. Turning it over to the rear-facing side, 16 megapixel stills versus versus 8 megapixel stills, and we have a 4K video versus 1080p at 60 frames per second on the iPhone. Most importantly, we have optical stabilization on the Samsung, which is a very similar system that we've seen in the Note 4 and the same system that's in the iPhone 6 Plus. So that means better low light performance because it can stabilize that shot better in situations where there's less light because the lens moves separately from the sensor. Furthermore, you should have a smoother video footage when you're shooting video on the Samsung as well. And when you take a look at the samples over here, you could see that in terms of the sharpness, you're going to find that the Samsung will deliver sharper looking images, especially in well-lit situations. When you're indoors or shooting at night, the Samsung tends to overexpose things a little bit, and even though things are fairly clear because you have the optical stabilization system, it doesn't look as nice, especially in low light situations, as the iPhone that 9 times out of 10 will shoot pretty decent looking photos and videos, especially for online distribution. In terms of the video specifications, obviously when you're shooting 4K, you're going to have more resolution to play with and indeed more sharpness, but the theme continues when you're in low light condition. All that resolution kind of goes to waste, and you'll find better looking results for even video when you're in more dimly lit situations. Now, last but not least, we're going to talk about the battery performance out of these two smartphones. Now, in terms of the battery capacity, we have 2600 milliamp hours on the Samsung S6 Edge versus about 1810 milliamp hours on the iPhone 6. Now, if you get the standard S6 model, you're looking at about 50 milliamp hours less, but the performance is fairly representative on both smartphones, so there's really no difference there. And in terms of my independent scores, I got around 16 hours of usage based on my behavioral profile and about 13 hours of usage on the iPhone. Now, for more detailed information, you definitely want to check out our video that we made on a dedicated battery comparison between these two, where we find out exactly what the differences are between real world tests and indeed more critical analysis on the battery performance. But in synopsis, the Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge will generally give you better overall battery performance. But other than that, guys, that's really it. So definitely check out our other dedicated videos on the Samsung Galaxy S6 versus the iPhone in terms of battery, camera, and the overall speed difference. So make sure you've checked out those dedicated videos to get more of a better idea on the difference between the two. But hopefully this gives you a good direction on whether you're going to go for the iPhone or the Samsung. So definitely let me know what you guys think in the description below. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and we'll see you later. Take care. Now, just one last thing, guys. I get a lot of people asking me on what they should do with their older smartphone. Should they put it on eBay, Craigslist? But to avoid all that hassle, there's actually a really cool service called Cashier. And if you go to sellcashier.com, these guys will actually buy your existing iPhone from all the major US carriers. They currently operate in the United States, but it's really simple to get a quote. You just select what carrier you're using, the specific model of your iPhone, and the overall condition. They'll even send you a free prepaid label and a box for free, which is quite fantastic and much better than selling it on eBay or meeting a stranger in a dark alley through Craigslist. And lastly, Sell Cashier prides themselves on giving you the absolute most for your iPhone. Compared to many of the other services that buy your iPhone, you're pretty much guaranteed that Sell Cashier will give you the best deal for your existing iPhone. So definitely go check them out. I think they definitely provide a useful and hassle-free service that you'll be pretty happy with.